Welcome to this episode of Moments in Leadership. My guest today is Mr. Vic Minella, former Undersecretary of the Navy. Vic's 38-year career is a remarkable journey from enlisted sailor to the second highest civilian position in the Department of the Navy. He began his service in rural Mississippi, then entered ROTC at the University of Mississippi, and then built a career in naval intelligence and senior defense leadership that few could have predicted from those humble beginnings. His career spans some of the most consequential moments in modern defense and intelligence history. Just 3 months into his naval intelligence career, his Pentagon office was destroyed on September 11, 2001, a defining moment that rewired his sense of personal responsibility and approach to leadership for the decades that followed. Before we get into today's conversation, I wanted to pause for a second to thank the Supercast supporters who make this project possible. Their financial support helps offset the cost of producing Moments in Leadership and allows me to keep the show completely free of product commercials. That support is also helping me elevate the podcast from an audio format to video. Today, I want to give a special thank you to Captain Jonathan Corbin, who has been a subscriber at the Hot Wash level for almost 2 years now. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with him face-to-face and get to know him personally over some drinks, and I wish him the best in his next tour. He's an artillery guy, by the way. Captain Corbin, you need to send me that 1st Marine Division CG coin and your mailing address so I can send you some swag. Okay, if you enjoy the show and want to support it, you can do so through the Supercast link in this account's profile or in any of the social media accounts on LinkedIn or Instagram. Okay, now back to Vic. Over his career, he held increasingly senior roles in naval intelligence, special operations, and security. He served as Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy for Intelligence and Security before taking on the Undersecretary role during a presidential transition in January of 2025. For several months, he held both positions simultaneously, managing 2 staffs, 2 calendars, and the full scope of both roles at the 4-star equivalent level with 0 pay increase. As Undersecretary, Vic represented the Department of the Navy on matters ranging from technology and acquisition to workforce development and global operations, often serving as the leading voice for the department during a period of significant change. He retired in the spring of 2025 and founded Minella Global Strategies, a consulting firm focused on technology transition, national security, and leadership development. In this episode, we talk about how 9/11 shaped his leadership philosophy, what it was like managing dual Pentagon roles during a political transition, and the importance of self-care and delegation when operating at unsustainable tempos, and why taking the oath seriously, not just credentials or connections, is the real foundation for advancement. Vic is refreshingly candid about his mistakes, his approach to staying in his lane, and what it meant for a young man from rural Mississippi to rise to the second highest position in the Department of the Navy. So with that, welcome, former Undersecretary of the Navy, Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy, now Mr. Vic Minella. Welcome back to the podcast. You've had some great past few years since we've been on the podcast together, and now you've got a whole new life. Why don't you catch us up on what you're up to and what your plans are?
Thanks, Dave. It is really great to be back. So I left government in end of April, beginning of May, and I took some time off, which was first and foremost the main thing I wanted to do after 38 years.
That's great.
So we did some travel, my wife and I did, and we also just enjoyed our family. We've had some other life events with our family, so we were able to take care of those and be a part of those throughout the summer. And I started a consulting firm.
Terrific.
And
what's the name of that?
Minella Global Strategies.
Makes sense.
Starting to build a client list, really enjoying it, and got to get it moving, but it's on its way.
That's great. So the last time we got together, you were Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy for Intelligence and
Security. That's correct.
But then after we cut our last episode, you became Undersecretary of the Navy. Explain to listeners what that means and how that changed your role. And did you keep the and for listeners who didn't hear it, the nickname is Dozen.
That's right.
Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy. Did you keep that role and assume more with no pay raise, I'm assuming? Or
none.
Okay,
0.
Right.
I did. I kept both roles.
Okay.
So this all happened in January. I kind of heard that it may occur towards the end of the calendar year. And then as we rolled into January, there was no permanent appointee yet for the undersecretary role. Typically, that doesn't happen for months later. And so my name was submitted to the White House And eventually, I think I was at home on I think it was the 24th of January. So after inauguration, and I got a call.
Okay, so it
And
was the new White House, it was the new administration that said,
that's right.
you're going to fill this role.
That's right.
Okay.
The name was put forward by the previous administration. Typically, that's how they do it for continuity of government.
Okay.
Each of these positions have to have someone in them, especially at that level. And so end of January, I had 2 jobs.
Wow.
Starting then.
Okay. So does that mean 2 staffs? Do you have 2? Because you had a staff when I visited you.
It did. And that is always challenging. Now I've got 2 calendars, and those have to be merged.
Mm-hmm.
The staffs have to then integrate, which is challenging in and of itself. The communication issues associated with this, and then just balancing the workload of 2 full roles. Fortunate for me, I had really strong senior directors below me or that were working for me as the deputy under. So a lot of that work I just shifted to them. They were highly capable and had been in the jobs for a while.
Did you have like a chief of staff who was the traffic cop between the 2 different? How did that work?
I did. I had a chief of staff at the deputy under office who was just fantastic, retired naval aviator, '06, former commanding officer. So he knew how to handle things.
Right.
But when I went to the unders role, I needed someone to stay with the deputy under job and keep the trains moving on time. He stayed there, and I brought in another senior executive who I'd known for nearly 20 years, and she became my chief of staff.
When you got the role as undersecretary, were there any moments where you were like, whoa, I had no idea that was any surprises? Did you walk into anything where you're like, oh my God, I had no idea this was going on. I need to fix this right now.
There was a lot.
And why was it amphibious shipping? No, I'm kidding.
Right. Yeah. Don't get me started.
Yeah.
I think just the scope and scale of the role.
Yeah.
Going from a deputy under role, which is very functional in nature, intelligence, security, special ops, sensitive activities, which I knew very well. I spent nearly 20 years doing a lot of this work, so very comfortable with that. And then I'm thrown into not only more responsibility, but a higher ranking role as well.
Right.
As essentially a 4-star equivalent.
Okay.
And so new people that I had to become familiar with, new counterparts. The administration was changing significantly, those that had left and those that were coming in. And so really just relearning my landscape and environment and becoming comfortable and building my own team again with the people that I needed to be successful in that role, and learning how and when we needed to be at meetings.
Right.
What was the prep time? And I was learning a lot of new subjects, of course, as the under. There's things I had never dealt with, and now I'm the leading voice for the Department of the Navy.
Was the new Secretary of the Navy already in? Because I had already been passed over for consideration for that role at that point. So,
Yeah.
But had he already come in and taken over, or were you still waiting for him to arrive? Because you were already there.
Yeah, we were waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't come in for several months.
Okay. And so who was filling that role?
They brought in acting.
Okay.
Similar to, me filling the undersecretary role. They brought in an acting from a very experienced senior executive from another part of the Defense Department.
Okay. So they had somebody come in. And
yeah, he was exceptional.
That's great. Well, I know that you recently had your retirement, and you were kind enough to pass along some of your retirement remarks. I went through and I have a couple questions that come out of a few things that you said in your retirement speech. If you don't mind, I'm just want to ask you some. Yeah, it'd be great. So in your retirement speech, you describe your Pentagon office as being destroyed on 9/11. And we talked about that in
Right.
the previous episode, and the loss of colleagues, and how you talk about that day rewired your purpose and tempo for actual intelligence work. And so I'm wondering, for emerging leaders, what changed in your leadership style after 9/11 that still shows up in how you lead today? And how did you manage the unhealthy drivers that you mentioned, like sleep loss and anger, so that your teams didn't pay the price for that?
Yeah. I think what rewired really the quickest was this feeling of personal responsibility. Naval intelligence, which is where I was working. I was only 3 months into my naval intelligence career, by the way, when this occurred at the Pentagon, and just happened to be off that day based on the way scheduling worked for shift work in the watch center. I think personal responsibility of everything around me as it related to intelligence. You have to think 9/11 was considered one of the greatest intelligence failures of our time, of our history. And so, what an important lesson to learn 3 months into your intelligence career.
I mean, it had to completely shape you.
It did. Everything about it. I thought I had worked hard up until that point, but 9/11 was an intensity that no one could have ever imagined in terms of the way that we structured collection
Sure.
of our adversaries, both terrorists as well as nation state adversaries, and all of that began coming at you in waves of information that was largely unsustainable. At least you thought it was. And so everyone's intensity, including mine, had to increase. And my intensity at that point, I think it stayed that way until about May,
Okay.
frankly. Honestly, I think that's one of the most important lessons I learned. And, just immediately after 9/11 was how hard you can be on yourself
Mhm.
and how cruel you can be to yourself. Your point about how did I protect my coworkers and staff from that anger and sleep deprivation. I don't know. I think we were all compassionate too.
Okay. Yeah.
We lost a lot of people, and the folks that were left and those that came in to rebuild, I think we all realized that there was a brotherhood and a camaraderie here. We were not the enemy. We took our frustration out on the enemy, not each other.
Everybody listening can relate to just complete changes in personality that happen when you get tired and
Yeah.
you've been up.
Right.
And, I wasn't there for the march up, but I'm sure that was just sustained 48, 72 hours, even longer, 96. People getting very, very limited amount of sleep. So everybody listening to this can
Mhm.
relate to, sleep loss and personality change.
Yeah.
So it's great when emerging leaders can hear senior leaders how they A, recognize it, and B, do something about it, because at some level everybody's got to do something about managing, because we just can't go
Yeah.
on like that.
I had very compassionate but driven leaders that came in after that. My officer in charge and assistant officer in charge were both killed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no leadership structure. Those all had to be replaced. And the people that were brought in were just absolutely fantastic humans first and exceptional intelligence officers second. And so that made a huge difference, huge education for me on watching crisis in such a significant national event be dealt with on such a professional level by O5s and O6s. They just did a phenomenal job. It was a great lesson for me.
Another part that you talked about was your
Hmm.
case. Your team credits with helping foil, I think you said something like more than 600 terrorist attacks, which is, an astonishing outcome. Walk me and the listeners through one leadership decision in that program that most contributed to repeatable results, right? Like,
Hmm.
how did you keep the organization focused on outcomes instead of, slide decks and process worship, I'll call it?
Yeah, so this was many years later. This effort was one of my very first civilian jobs after I retired from the Navy
Mhm.
in 2008. So this time frame was around 2009. The program was strictly focused on counterterrorism.
Mhm.
And, the number of attacks that you referenced there, you have to keep in mind, and the context of that was Iraq, Afghanistan, and the number of attacks that our troops were under.
Mhm.
Those numbers are not exaggerated. They're probably underreported, frankly. I think the most important decision when I was told that I was going to take this over was listen more, talk less. I had a lot to learn. This was not a typical role for a former intelligence officer. This was programmatics, this was tech, this was field integration, nothing that I had done necessarily before, but Secretary of the Navy believed that when we took this program over that I was the right person. I think he thought I could do it more than I thought I could do it initially. I think the most important decision I made was to go into theater immediately.
Mhm.
I think about a month after I took over, I flew to Afghanistan, and what I learned there in that first trip was probably the most important couple weeks that I had in the 6 years that I led this program. I was able to evaluate every aspect of the program, starting with the operational integration of it.
Mhm.
Is it meeting the operator's needs? The answer was no, it was not. And then you can work backwards from there. I think until you understand, is it meeting the needs of our warfighter, then you don't really know your program. And from every aspect of the field support work to the logistics to how we were buying, what we were buying, how we communicated, I was able to evaluate that from that week all the way through about 90 days. I didn't wait, Dave, until the end of that 90 days and say, hey, I figured it all out. Let's make the change. We changed as we went. And so as I saw things that were clearly detrimental to the program, we made immediate changes over those 90 days. And by the end of that 90 days, we were better. We weren't great, but we were better. And so I think those first few weeks, month or so, getting into theater and working backwards from theater was the absolute most important decision I made.
Yeah. To the extent possible, can you explain just so people have some context?
The best context I can provide, this program was highly classified. It's still classified, but it was focused on supply chain interdiction.
Okay. So, I mean, really ripe for on the move, on the go adjustments to things as you're seeing them.
Right.
Right. And this is why young leaders impressioned on young leaders so quickly, like walk the lines, because that's essentially what you were doing, right? You were walking the lines.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You backed the model of sending engineers forward as field service reps and feeding that live data back into the design loop. So for leaders running tech programs today, because not everybody out there's a grunt, right? That listens to this. How do you create the conditions for that kind of, tight operator engineer feedback without, burning people out or losing discipline on things like configuration control? I'm making that word up, but that.
Yeah. The most important personnel decisions that I made in this program were on field support reps.
Okay.
I found individuals, thankfully, it didn't happen all at once. Just a short story about this and my recognition of how important field support reps, and these are technicians, they can have engineering backgrounds, operator backgrounds.
They're civilians.
They're civilians.
Yeah.
Or contractors.
Okay.
I realized when I went in that was where the most detriment to the program is that we had one that was exceptional. He stayed with me nearly until I was no longer on the program and is off doing really great things at another agency now. But I found my contractors were fighting among each other, literally fist fighting in the field.
Former Marines?
Of course they were. Every single one of them. Not all of them, but they were in the mix, of course, because they weren't active duty anymore. They had to fight someone. Right. And so the integrity of the program was in jeopardy based on the people that I was putting forward.
Sure.
They had to not just be techs, they had to be communicators. And so what I did was I went back to DC here in the DC area from my office, and we changed everything about the way we evaluated and interviewed individuals that we were sending forward. I said to myself, if I can't be there, who do I want communicating this program in such a way that it advances the program, the utilization of the program, and saves lives? And so that's how we shaped the way we interviewed and then sent forward, and it changed everything, Dave. I saw a 500% utilization in the first 6 months after we changed the model by which we evaluated people going in, not the tech, the people. And so that was a significant decision that we made. The burnout issue is significant. And we did burn a few people out. Some wanted to be there all the time. Some didn't want to necessarily come home. They had transitioned and realized that they wanted to be in direct support of the warfighter. And so they would go over for 90 days, maybe 120. They would come back and they would be volunteering to go back right away. I was cautious about that because not everyone knows that they're being burned out. And sometimes they don't care, but we have to care as leaders a lot more. You have to see it. You have to understand what it looks like. And you might need to just say, hey, you need a break, my friend. You're doing God's work here. I agree. But I'm going to put you in a role that won't be forward deployed, but you're going to be able to see your family at night. You're going to be able to get a whole night's sleep, and you don't have to worry about rockets hitting you on the head. So that's what I did. We did create a balance. I tried to go 6 months. It was too long with our reps forward.
Okay.
But the thing that really mattered the most was the full communication cycle. It isn't just the people deployed. It's the people that are available in the back to provide continuous tech data, a technical response, a conversation with leadership. Is it legal? Is there a policy issue? All of that network I had to create. This program, when I took it over, I had one Navy lieutenant. That was all I had, and no budget. And so, you learn a lot about your program when you start to see things that you don't have and you realize we're failing in this area. So I created a structure of reach back to the technical labs, both in the DoD as well as our prime contractors as well. And those people were amazing. They were as if they were on the front lines themselves. They understood the urgency of it. And so they provided just relentless support to the warfighter. And I think that solved a lot of my concern that we're going to burn out and just ruin really talented people that we were sending into theater. That saved a lot of those guys.
I think in listening to all that, and you said you're able to, implement some changes and things like that. I wonder if you have some follow-up advice on that comment, because listening to you, I realize I'm sitting across the table for listeners. We're sitting in my global headquarters, podcast studio here, but so we're actually sitting, unlike the other ones I do remotely. As I'm sitting here talking to you about this, I realize that I'm sitting across the table from somebody who was Undersecretary of the Navy. So how many people above you could say no to your idea? You don't have to answer that, but versus the Lance Corporal or the seaman or the petty officer, right, who's got a whole chain of command that's got to say yes to something. So what sort of advice do you have to give to somebody who made changes, but maybe it was easier for you to make changes because you were so high up the chain that you could just say, do this. And then there's all this triangle underneath you that does it. But then there's these people out there that they want to make the changes, right? They want to do the things. And maybe some of those changes could have been made lower than you before you discovered it, made the changes. If maybe they were empowered or I don't know if I have a question there as much as I'm making a statement and seeing what your reaction to that is.
It's such a great leadership conversation to have, especially if you're a Lance Corporal or you're an E3, you may feel like you have no power.
Right.
I beg to differ. I think you've got more power than you realize. You just don't exercise it. In some cases, you probably do. I think when you're more senior, I think the decisions become way more complicated.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They do, because the decisions that I would make as the under or the deputy under affected the entire department, not just one individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look back on my enlisted days as a Navy corpsman and I think, wow, how simplistic that was, but how underutilized I allowed myself, or how many opportunities I may have missed because I felt like I had to ask for permission, or I was nervous about it, an initiative that I was going to take and I should have taken it. I think leaders want you to take initiative, not reckless initiative, but I think they want you to take greater initiative and make decisions on your own, because we've all had that boss that looks at you and go, well, of course I want you to do that.
Right.
Right. When you're the undersecretary or the deputy under, you do get you sort of mired in the bureaucracy of the decisions have to be fully informed. I'm about to make a decision here that's going to affect the entire force.
Right.
That's complicated, and it always is. Some decisions are certainly easier than others, but there's a lot at stake. I think when you're more junior, get comfortable really pressing that limit to be the leader that eventually you're going to want to bring out in others.
That's the key point, I think. Yeah.
And, all too often, we as junior sailors and Marines and troops, we want to take initiative, but we're also under this military mentality of like, well, I'll be told what to do. It is truly the wrong approach.
There's so many people that say, there's that leadership saying like, be the leader that you wish you had when you were younger. That the corollary to that is be the follower that you want to have when you're in charge someday.
Right.
And it does take that. That's interesting because as you were talking, I kind of reflected back on thinking about myself when I was a lieutenant, and decisions seemed really hard and I agonized over things, right? And then I become a battery commander and I'm like, dude, this is so easy. What are you struggling with this
It's
for?
so true.
And you just get better and better at these things and finally you look at it. But I guess that's where the mentorship comes from. That's where the empowerment comes from, because I'll just use captain and lieutenant because most people listening will understand that, or it could be staff sergeant, or sergeant corporal or whatever. But if you empower those people to learn how to make those decisions and then reflect back on when you were in that position, it just makes it a little bit easier. Because I had those moments all the time, like, oh, I'd give anything to be a lieutenant again because I'd make all these decisions differently. Well, yeah, of course, because I've got 20 years of experience when I'm making that comment in my own head.
Right. Dave, you had a chance to read my retirement speech. There's one thing you won't find in that speech, and that's me talking about the senior positions. I only talk about the positions that I had when I
Hmm.
was junior, both as an officer and also as enlisted. And the reason for that is they are foundational beyond belief. You cannot understand how important those fundamental roles and positions that you're going to have will shape your entire life. I can literally hear myself as a young sailor and the things that are coming out of my mouth as the undersecretary. I understand why I make those decisions. I mentioned triage a lot. Being a corpsman is not that different than being the undersecretary. You have things coming at you that are life or death.
Yeah.
You have things that are coming at you that you can't control, and you need to be able to make decisions that are the right one without a lot of information sometimes.
Right. One of the interesting things that you talked about in your retirement speech was the 3D printer story, and you essentially greenlit a high-end 3D printer to buy it, and you used physical models to get senior leaders to, see the value. So, what can emerging leaders learn about when to take, let's just call it a budget risk or anything, an expenditure risk, something like that, and how to tell the story so that decision makers, they can say yes,
Mhm.
and then how to measure whether that bet is actually paying off because that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. Looking back, it was an easy decision, but I did agonize over this decision quite a bit. At the time, it was a lot of money for an asymmetric program. We don't have big budgets
Hmm.
typically. And so every dollar must count. And I had some really important leaders that worked with me that had advised me on this opportunity. And I'm like, well, that's great. But what does this capability do for us? Explain it to me. And so the biggest problem in any program that you're running where contracting and finance is involved is your ability to do that quickly.
Hmm.
It's always the delay, the time to get things to contract, and then for the contract to be performed. What we did through the 3D printing, and this is just an example of where you need to bake out any delays and find speed in your entire production process
Hmm.
wherever you can find it. And a very modest investment, not even $1 million, changed everything for our program. And the reason why that was is that I looked at the aspects of the tools that we were using, the hardware that we were producing through contractual structures, like going out and having a classified but traditional industry partner build something. If I could build that indoors and no one even needs to be in the building, I just plug this in
Yeah.
through the software
Hmm.
and we go home at night, we come back the next morning and these are all built, I'm in.
Yeah.
That's how we reduced wasted time. So I think that that investment, when I looked at it, was what does this do for the operator? Well, now I have something working for me 24/7 without any breaks. I can reload it tomorrow morning when I get there. I've got tools or equipment that I can literally install and potentially ship the very next day. So for me, the decision was really one of the return on investment here is that I'm going to deliver things up to 6 months faster than I could.
That's just crazy. I mean, yeah.
And when you see the numbers there on those attacks that were prevented, this had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
So if you're evaluating technology and you are having to justify that technology to leadership or to your resourcing chiefs in your organization or your military organization, you really need to come up with a story. What's the story here? What is it that you're going to do that no one else is doing right now or can do? And what can you do for the people who are your customers? And my customers were warfighters.
Yeah.
That's how I justified it. And looking back, it's such an easy decision. But we did take some time to evaluate the range of capabilities that existed through 3D metal sintering systems. And we found one that was right for us. And it's still in operation today.
Was it literally a situation where where you said, okay, I'm going to build this thing overnight. And then you went to somebody and said, look, see what I just did
Oh, I
over
totally
like,
did that. In my office, I had exemplars that we had produced off of this 3D printer. And it produced metal. I mean, whatever type of
so it was
metal.
like a CNC machine that would cut metal? Or is
It,
that essentially what it was? Or,
3D printing, the ones that we would use would build from a powder.
and it would build something
Think of
out
a
of metal.
substance, and it would essentially just build layers up until that
Okay.
device was created.
I close my eyes and I see a 3D printer doing plastic. That's why I didn't.
Right.
Okay. Got
Yeah,
it.
just think of something if you were to envision something on the ground and then it just growing from the ground. sort of what it looks like.
And it was metal.
And it was metal.
Okay.
The capability was big, but the tray that we would develop was about 18 inches wide. But we could stack that quite a bit, and it could run nearly 24/7.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what we did. We would build parts, we built equipment. We started using it for the fleet and other ways. It was an amazing piece of technology that changed everything about the way that we thought our production system would work.
I'm curious about one of the things that you said or alluded to in your retirement speech was that your colleagues said that you've routinely traveled to the combat zones to see deployments firsthand. I'm wondering if you can tell us about a specific trip where you saw on the ground a program decision back in DC changed a program. How can leaders who can't travel still walk the ground like we were talking about before through other mechanisms or, and avoid some blind spots?
If you can't go yourself, then you have to have someone you trust to go for you.
Mm-hmm.
And traveling to a location that you're responsible for, whether it's a military base. When I was the deputy under, I had responsibility for all naval, both Navy and Marine Corps installations from a security perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I really can't learn that from my office in the Pentagon. I had to get out. And boy, the lights come on as soon as you start talking to people who have to live security every single day. It was the same in counterterrorism. It was the same in providing capability to the field. The one thing that I realized, Dave, especially on those early days when I was running this one CT program, is that I realized from one of those trips that I didn't really own all aspects of my program.
Okay.
Going back to the field support reps, to the logistics, to the finance. Each of these areas need to be brought in and synchronized so that they are working in unison. And they were not. So security was a part of that, right? And so I had to bring all of those people into one facility as often as I could with the engineers, with operators. And we created this essential machine of programmatic expertise that allowed us to move so much faster and to understand our program. If we do this on security, what happens to my money? Do we cost ourselves out of our ability to build another widget or another part?
Okay.
Right? And the same could be in a company or a business. If you're putting undue regulatory responsibilities or restrictions on a part of your overall production process, what does it do to the cost at the end? What does it do to the ability to produce the same number? We saw that even in an asymmetric program like I ran. And so we would evaluate that very quickly from end to end. We're going to make this decision. What does it do all the way through?
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to bake out a lot of those problems very quickly. Number one thing I had to do was I had to own that process. I had to own everything about my program.
Natural question here, because I reflect back on, when anybody said, hey, the boss is coming. So if you're traveling overseas and you're going to look at things like that, everybody knows you're coming, right? Hey, the under's coming, the deputy under's coming. So everybody starts, cleaning up their shit, right? How much did that impact your ability to actually assess what was going on? Like, did people start focusing so much on making sure that everything was proper and they weren't going to embarrass themselves? And did that hinder your ability to uncover some things that needed to be adjusted or tweaked or fixed?
I'm sure it did at times. When you go to a military installation and you're there to have conversations with leadership, if you're getting the dog and pony, so to speak,
Yeah,
or
great way
you're
to put
getting
it.
real issues, right? It's a dead giveaway when everything's working just fine, right? If it's working just fine, you know that they're not being honest with you because nothing's ever working just
Mhm.
great. And so the good news is that I had a team that was working at lower levels with those individuals that maybe work for the commanding officer of an installation, as an example. And they were typically pretty honest about their shortcomings in certain areas. But you're right, it does raise the anxiety level when the deputy under or the under is traveling to a location. I didn't like that part of it. I almost wish I could just show up. And
Yeah.
it's tough for me to do that. It certainly was impossible for me to do that as the under. But as the deputy under, there were times that I was able to do a little bit of that. But yeah, those days went away where I could just show up to an office somewhere in the Navy or Marine Corps and say surprise.
Yeah.
That wasn't fair to them. But I would have loved to have done a lot more of that. I'd have learned a lot more, I think.
I've asked that question to a few of the general officer guests that I've had on because I close my eyes and I see myself as a general, as scary as that sounds. But And I think to myself, if I was just driving around and I saw some Marines working in the motor pool, I'd probably just pull over and ask them what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I'll say that to them, and they're like, Dave, like, you just can't do that. That just, it creates this huge dust storm and everything else. So I thought it would be so easy for a senior person to just pop in and see things and just out of general curiosity. And then I learned pretty quickly that's just a bad thing to do. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I always like asking that question.
It is. I struggled with this because I love walkabout. I love that time, that very genuine connection with a sailor or a civilian or a Marine. And I would do this even in the Pentagon. And yeah, it did raise the anxiety levels. But if you're known as someone who does that, it's about conditioning.
Yeah.
It is. You learn a lot by doing this. And if your people can't be honest with you and just have a frank conversation with you, what kind of leader are you anyway?
Right.
And so I realized the rank is always going to stand in the way at times and create a bit of anxiety. But I think over time, if you're showing a solid pattern of doing that and you are a genuine, authentic individual and your approach to those people, and Dave, this is a question I would ask. It may come up later, but I would always ask this question. Hey, what's the hardest thing you're working on today and how can I help?
Yeah.
Do you know how disarming that is for people?
And it's an invitation to be totally honest.
It is. It is. Like, I'm going to walk away here in a few minutes. And if you've told me nothing and you're struggling with this, you have your own self to fault. And I'm in it. I would sit down. And so go ahead, tell me.
Yeah.
I would have a few people that were willing to share, but most unfortunately would not.
See, I think that's great advice for an emerging leader is to ask that question. You know, what's the hardest thing you're working on right now? I mean, even a sergeant can ask a corporal, like, hey, what's the hardest thing going on with your fire team or squad right now?
Yeah.
Or on a ship or on aircraft maintenance section or something like that.
It is about embracing the difficulties that we all have faced previously. My question in asking that was recognition that I know you're working on something consequential and hard.
Sure.
And, you know, you probably woke up this morning knowing that you weren't going to be able to get it done today. Maybe your stomach was hurting. You know, you're scared that, that your immediate supervisor is not going to like that you aren't finished with it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what's the problem? I mean, if we just ask people, how can I help you today? Instead of saying, just go back to your office and get it resolved, I probably stopped a lot of what I could accomplish personally by just getting involved with the people that need you more than a phone call or an email and have a conversation with them. And you know what? We did solve things that way, though. It's amazing if more leaders would just do that, rather than acting as though you shouldn't ask those questions. You should.
One of my previous guests, Lieutenant General Dave Bellin, and now that I just said his name, I feel like you know him, right?
Dave and I know each other very well.
Okay, so then you'll appreciate what he said. Yeah,
absolutely.
One of the things when I asked him that question, like, how do you get out and see? And he gave the audience the best tip ever. I love this. He'd say, you know, a little bit before a staff meeting was going to start, where I knew I was going to sit in a conference room and there's going to be a slide deck and all these people, and the slideshow dog and pony show was going to go on. He said, I would just say, I need to use the head real quick. Point me in the direction of the head, because nobody will say, like, well, I'll go with you. Nobody's going to say that to a three-star general, right? And he goes, and then I'd walk around and get a little lost and pop into offices and say hi and things like that. And he goes, and that was totally disarming. And I would just learn a lot by doing that. I was like, yeah, that's
terrific.
Yeah.
He's so great.
Smart
Dave's
guy.
so
Yeah,
great.
I know. Anyway, I have a question about again, this comes out of your retirement speech, but you said that your team described you as a hawk. Intense, exacting, I think were some of the words that were in there, with basement Pentagon pep talks. Okay, did I get that far right?
Yeah.
When things drifted. And so on the podcast, you also stressed, our previous episode, you also stressed coaching over directing. So the question is, how did you reconcile intensity with psychological safety, you know, in practice? And what early signs tell a leader that they're slipping into this, I'll just call it fear-based management, because that happens a lot in the military.
It really does. Yeah. It really does. Yeah. I know the examples that were used. That was my master of ceremonies is the one who used that term hawk in the ceremony. And there was a couple times when I felt that integrity had been jeopardized, both in the program and also with me. So when those early morning Pentagon pep talks, as they would call them, which they were probably not pep talks, those were certainly born out of frustration at times that we had so much on the line. And Dave, if I can, I'll go back just a minute. A couple years after I took over this program, I had experienced there were major leadership issues within the Department of the Navy and executives above me. And I had spent significant amount of time putting the organization back together, hiring new staff, having to resolve IG investigations and audits that were the result of decisions that previous leaders had made. And so I had invested not just time on a program, but I had invested time on an entire organization and rebuilding that organization. A lot of the times when I would have these morning pep talks, it was the concern that I had that we were falling back into an environment that would compromise the overall integrity of the organization. And that is really one of the comments that they're referencing there. There was an incident that did cause me grave concern. And it was an integrity issue by an employee that worked for me. And ultimately, it ended up costing him his job
Hmm.
as a result. But I never, on integrity, if there's a decision that you know that you're making, and I've been very clear, either through written or verbal direction to you, and you usurp my authority based on an ego or a decision you feel like is the right one to make, there was so much packed into the decision in my direction.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot at that point ignore the fact that I provided you that very detailed direction at the beginning. As a result, I had an employee that caused me some grave concern to the point where I was not willing to allow them to compromise the organization further.
Civilians.
Civilian.
Sorry for the off the cuff question. This
Yeah.
is just coming from a complete ignorant side because I don't have any experience in DoD civilian world. What happens when civilians get in trouble? Like we've got the UCMJ, right, in the military. What do you have on the civilian side?
We have an HR,
Okay.
just like any other civilian organization would have. It can be a little bit cumbersome in a case where an individual may not have demonstrated a really bad pattern of behavior, but then makes a catastrophic mistake.
Okay.
I have a lot of tools at my disposal if an individual does that. In my environment, if you are making decisions that are compromising your own integrity or the integrity of an organization itself, then just the fact that your access to classified information
Sure.
could be the reason why I remove you. And that was essentially the case in this incident.
Is there a law enforcement agent? Like if somebody's doing something
Yeah.
from a criminal perspective,
Oh, sure.
who handles that?
In the Department of the Navy, it's NCIS.
NCI, well,
Yeah.
of course, just like the TV
Yeah,
show.
right. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'm not watching
And
enough
they're
TV.
and they're embedded in all aspects of the Department of the Navy's work. And in fact, I had an NCIS agent on my own staff that helped us with a variety of things, not so much criminal, but more on the counterintelligence side of the house.
That
Threat.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
In your career highlights in the retirement speech, you note getting your entire team out during the fall of Afghanistan.
Mhm.
And I know it's a hot button right now. We just had one of the anniversary recently. What decision framework did you use under time and uncertainty? Who did you empower, and what should young leaders steal from that playbook for their own crisis management moments?
I've lectured on this issue of crisis management before, and I think the number one thing that you must understand is that you will be faced with a crisis as a leader.
Yeah.
So now, when you're in the middle of a crisis, is not the time to begin the planning.
Mm-hmm.
And you essentially just need to plan these things out. You need to have conversation. What's the worst thing that could happen? What's the absolute worst thing that could happen? Did we envision the fall of Afghanistan the way that we did? No, we did not a year prior. But I had already begun removing larger aspects of my program out of the country. In fact, we had a very minimal team there at the time of the fall of Kabul. And there were a couple different teams, so I won't go into those for security reasons, but there were a number of different types of activities that I was responsible for, coordination with other members of the U.S. government. But this was one of those crises where if the people on the ground forward do not know what to do, you're not going to be able to help them much from DC.
Sure.
Right. And so I think Training your entire team in a crisis is the absolute most important thing to do. You have to have trained and ready personnel. You have to have a communication structure in place, and you need to have resilient comms, both primary and backup. You have to know who to call. You have to have a phone tree. It's very basic stuff in many cases. But then you need to figure out how I'm going to manage through the crisis. There's a reporting aspect or our ability to communicate, but then there's also this issue of how am I going to lead the team now if this crisis endures over time. Dave, I told another story, a brief story in my retirement speech, and I've used this. It's a story that happened. The origins of this story was at a promotion ceremony that I was having. And one of my daughters, I won't mention her name because she does still get embarrassed about this,
Okay.
but she was much younger. This was about 10 years ago, and it was my SES promotion. And after the ceremony was over, she had a piece of cake, and that cake flipped out of that plate and went face down on very beautiful blue carpet in the Secretary of the Navy's dining room.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And so I've coined this as a leadership moment is we all drop our cake. And there was a young man that day that swooped in and picked up that cake before it even bounced and had it cleaned up. Now, my daughter still cried. She was upset.
Sure.
She was a young girl at the time, but he made it like it didn't even happen. That really left something with me is that no one saw it but her mother and I. And there was a person there that cleaned up a mess that she felt bad about. We were fine with it. Of course,
Mhm.
these things happen. And so it made me think about this issue of, well, we all drop our cake. And I think crisis management is really about dropping your cake because it's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
It's going to happen to a teammate or a shipmate or a fellow Marine or someone in your company. And it is the team that you build far left of crisis that gets you through crisis. It isn't the leader himself. The leader must begin building that for that day. And that is building with the right teammates, with the right training, with the right confidence in you and the right confidence you have in them. And to know that whether it's a piece of cake hitting the floor or if it's a crisis in your company or a death of a member of your team, that you know what to do. And even though it may hurt, it's a horrible event, someone has to lead through it. And if everyone's leading through it, then you don't have a crisis of leadership. It's just a crisis.
Right.
Now you can work through these things. I will never forget this as being one of the most important leadership lessons I have had. And it happened right at my retirement ceremony. And I said to myself, that guy didn't even know my daughter, but he was on our team. And he took care of exactly what he needed to take care of to ensure that that young lady and my ceremony and everyone around us had a wonderful time. Okay, that's party planning 101,
Right.
but it is way bigger than that in the Defense Department and way bigger than that and everywhere else in our either our government or our industry partners. Real crisis happens. It is who you have on your team and are they the people that are going to rush in and fix that problem before it becomes a bigger crisis? That is really my entire SES time that I worked as a senior executive. I've really thought through this about every member of my team needs to be the person I can count on, and they need to know they can count on me. We all drop our cake, Dave.
I'm going to tell you a great story of something I saw that's very similar to that. I was at an 8th and I parade, and the Commandant, Eric Smith, just because this podcast could be around in 20 years and nobody will know who I'm talking about. If I say the Commandant, don't say his name, they're going to think I'm talking about Archibald Henderson because I'm so old, right?
Right.
But I was at an 8th and I parade. There was rain or something. We were in the, I don't know what they call it, but the big auditorium kind of thing, right behind the cannons. And people were having some drinks and things like that. And of course, the Commandant has people around him that are trying to say hi and things like that. And he's in his dress blues. And a small boy was standing there and somebody bumped and his drink went down the front of his suit. You know, he's wearing a suit. And he just vapor locked. The kid just vapor locked because now he's got this drink spilled on him. And the Commandant looked, saw the whole thing happen and just basically stopped everything, parted the sea of the crowd, walked over to the kid, took his rank insignia off his epaulet, the 4 stars, frogged them, took them off, and pinned them on the kid's jacket. Like, you think, like, he rehearsed that in his head a million times. If I ever see a small child to get his drinks on him when there's a rainstorm, I mean, it was so instinctive. He just did it. I saw this whole thing happen. I thought, oh my God, that was almost like pre-thought out, but it wasn't. Now you've got a commandant at 8th and I in dress blues with no rank insignia on one of his epaulets, right? How long can you let the commandant walk around like that? And within 30 seconds, somebody was there with a new one, like fixing it and everything like that. And I thought, it's almost as like you said, you kind of pre-plan these crises and you see things happening. And some major, his aide or his lieutenant colonel, I don't remember what rank the Marine was that fixed it, but it was a field grade officer, was carrying around an extra rank insignia just in case. Like that's like foreseeing crisis management. Like,
That's absolutely right.
what are the chances that the commandant loses his rank in the middle of an 8th Eye parade? Probably 0, but that guy was ready to go. Right. And here's this kid walking around with the 4 stars on his jacket. It was really, really cool moment. So
That is some serious team building.
yeah, it's
right?
really, really great.
Really great. And not a surprise that the commandant did that.
Yeah.
He's wonderful.
Yeah, I know. If anybody's listening, you can get him on here, please. So in our last podcast episode, you told this story about confronting compromised training integrity earlier in your career and later during programs like, I think I get this right, Jedi Ball?
It was a project.
Okay,
Right.
right. You were the ones who was setting the guardrails for the others. What can leaders learn about enforcing lines like that, right? Without killing initiative, because we were talking about that earlier. Like, how do you empower people to make decisions but not kill the initiative? And how do you keep your own standards from turning into, I don't know, a bureaucracy that just slows down the whole mission?
I'm sure your listeners are saying there's no way there was a project called Jedi Ball. And it totally was.
Awesome.
Totally was.
Do or do not. There is no try.
That's right.
That could have been the tagline.
I loved it. I loved
Right.
it. This was a project that really tested me from the standpoint of everything was wrong with it from the very beginning.
Any context for what it was? Just
it was a sensor.
You're off the hook.
It was
right?
it was a sensor, or believed to be a sensor. I had significant concerns about the technology itself and that it really wasn't meeting a necessary mission requirement of our operating forces.
Okay.
This project I had become aware of months prior to this, and it was presented to me as an opportunity that I wanted to invest in, or that someone thought I would want to invest in as a part of a portfolio of capabilities that were necessary, they thought, to support our warfighter. I didn't buy it. Not on this one. This was not something that I was convinced, and the tech really had not been demonstrated. And I didn't have the type of requirement that I needed from operating forces, from a competent authority, such as a general, right? This came from much lower level. And I said, hey, just get a general officer on the phone with me so I can have a conversation with him. That never happened. So I thought it went away. I'd signed no to this requirement and pushed it back.
Yeah.
I had a program manager that decided he was going to fund it anyway. And talk about an integrity breach. In these types of things, we also have what's called, when finances are spent on a project that they're not authorized, it can be what's known as an Anti-Deficiency Act violation. In this particular case, it didn't really go that far, but it goes right back to the team that you build. I had people around this individual, and I had checks and balances that had been put in place. I had guardrails that had been put in place about standard business that I learned when my previous leadership had those issues with the IGs. I knew exactly what I needed to do to ensure that I never had to deal with someone inside my organization that might want to go rogue a little bit and decide that they were smarter than everyone else and were going to spend money on something that they should not spend without authorization. Well, this one individual, he attempted it.
Yeah.
And it was because of the structure that I had put in place with these just amazing people. And it was a lady who was a finance specialist, just an incredible woman who's now retired civil servant, who was a finance specialist. She found this being spent and brought it to my attention. And it was a hard thing to see because I really respected this individual and he made a huge mistake. But going back to this issue, Dave, there are red lines with me, and we all need to have red lines. You have to have You have the guardrails, but if someone compromises one of those guardrails, you have to know what's going to break you. You'll bend in certain ways, but you've got to know, here is my line. My compass says this is true north, and if you compromise true north with me, you do it twice. Shame on me, right?
Right.
He admitted to it. I called him on it. He admitted to it, and he resigned that day
Hmm.
because he knew there was no coming back from that.
Okay.
He knew, because he had received a written determination by me saying that you were not authorized to purchase this, and he went and did it anyway. That's the ultimate.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't do this. And so I think that the most important part of that entire event, and my team, by the way, anytime someone says the Jedi Ball, everyone cringes right around me, right? Because they know that this was a really bad event. This could have unraveled an entire set of capabilities if someone had decided to call an IG on the organization. I almost felt like I needed to call in friendly fire on my own organization as a result.
Oh, is that serious?
It was
Yeah.
that serious,
Okay.
right? Because now I'm questioning, well, what else? So I had to go and do this review. Luckily, I didn't find anything else, but I was ready to call in, fire on my position. And here we go again. I dealt with this. We cleaned it all up, and now we're right back with one individual. So there's going to be people that get inside the wire.
Mhm.
There are. No matter how hard you try, people are going to get inside the wire that aren't going to see things with the true north that you see. But if you've got enough people who do, it's never going to be the big crisis. It's going to be, you're going to bump the guardrail, but you're not going to go over the guardrail.
Right.
And I think that was something that, had I not gone through this big cleanup of this previous organization where my previous leadership had been removed, and understanding what they did and the loss of confidence that they created in an entire department at that time, I would have not set the organization up the way that I did. But thankfully, I did go through those lessons. And so I think, to your point, is when does guardrails become overdoing the bureaucracy, right?
Right.
I think that the context is important here to understand that the guardrails will always be there. And don't confuse bureaucracy for strong leadership of someone who has seen something that has unraveled really great programs, has caused leaders to be removed from their positions. Bureaucracy is a term that is thrown out all too often when people don't want to have to follow the rules
Sure.
at times,
Mhm.
right? And so I'm always a little cautious when someone says, well, there's just too much bureaucracy. I understand that. Trust me, I'm an asymmetric guy. Special ops is my first love. But there are times when there's a dose of bureaucracy that keeps us all on the straight and narrow so that we get to do the incredible things that we get to do in the profession of our military service. If you ignore those rules, or you think that bureaucracy is not a part of it, well, you're probably next.
Right.
I'm always a little cautious in guiding people through the understanding of bureaucracy. Don't confuse it with staying compliant with your oath.
Some bureaucracy has been written in blood.
It is.
That's just kind of like something happens. You just say, okay, what are we going to do to create a rule to make sure that never happens again?
Right. The entire, if you look at the, we call it the NATOPS manual,
Right.
which is,
I was just about to say, just like a NATO's manual, right?
yeah, everything that says warning here, it's written in blood.
It's like Top Gun 2 when Maverick throws an ATOPS into the trash can. You're like, okay, this is no longer believable.
Right. No,
But,
no
yeah,
longer believable.
right.
That's absolutely the case.
Yeah, you're right though. Yeah, the bureaucracy can be, sometimes it's there for everybody's good. It's rare that it was just created by some person who wanted to create a rule to get a medal, but
Right.
most of the time it's bureaucracy has been created because there's been an accident and they put the guardrails in, and that's why it's there.
Or it's law.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we all have to be mindful of those things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Speaking about asymmetric programs and asymmetric capabilities, your remarks mentioned times when leadership tried to cut asymmetric programs, and you fought back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, how should emerging leaders prepare to defend, what they would see as critical capabilities when the narrative shifts and the budget knives come out? What data, stories, or allies mattered most to you in those situations?
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell some stories?
Yeah, sure. Asymmetric capability isn't always at the top of what our senior leaders want to purchase. It's not a ship. It's not a sub. It's not an aircraft. Maybe it's not an M4 or the next handheld weapon. It's more unique.
Mhm.
It's more niche. And many times, especially in asymmetric capabilities, you really have to tell a story. You have to understand the capability and truly how it can be utilized for the warfighter, because not everyone that you're going to be justifying this to can understand it the way that you do.
Yeah.
And so I think the way that I survived in running the one program I did, because it was year to year, there were times I didn't think I was going to have any money. It truly came down to storytelling. It was not just one storyboard at a time or one incident, although those were helpful. I had to tell the strategic story. So the tactical stories are great, and they were. I mean, you can imagine with a program that prevented terrorist attacks like that, there were a lot of stories.
Yeah.
We had a lot of stories, and they were compelling. But eventually, they were not compelling anymore. Eventually, it was, well, the budget is tighter. How does this fit in to this phase of the war in Afghanistan, as an example? Or moving forward now, how will this fit into war with China or war with Russia or any other nation state or asymmetric adversary? So it really does come down to allies. It really
Mhm.
does. I think you asked me that question, what does the people around you and those that can help you through this? And I'll tell you, it is really understanding the environment that you're in. And I would say things as much as congressional, you have to have allies on the Hill.
Sure.
You have to have legal allies because, when you're looking at whether or not this is legal or not, you have to have people that are sound legal practitioners and they're attorneys that aren't just willing to say no. And I had those wonderful people on my staff, but sometimes they need to tell you no, like this is not legal, right?
Right.
So you've got to understand that if you're about to advise senior leadership, you've done your homework. You have to have the people around you that can support you, your financial people. You have to tell you, is this the right number? Am I going to go in there and say, I'm asking for $500,000 or 50 million? Is that the right figure? Because if it's not, I'll never get another chance.
Right.
I'm going to go back next time. They go, hey, your number last time was pretty squishy.
Yeah.
So why should I believe you this time? So I think it really comes down to having the right team assembled and really, really evaluating the data that's presented to you as a leader.
Yeah.
Budgets are hard. They are hard. As the under, I saw this even more firsthand about how difficult the decisions were being made. It seems as though right now, I think this administration is really shifting towards a much more asymmetric mindset in many
Mhm.
ways. There's big bills and big purchases that need to be made, Dave, but there's also an eye on unmanned, both in the water as well as in the air.
Yeah.
And so I think you're seeing kind of a resurgence of post Afghanistan, post big deployments to Iraq, where now the asymmetric side of things and the littorals and the work that we're going to need to do to fight a very strong adversary, potentially with China, is that we may not be able to outshoot them. So there's got to be asymmetric capabilities. So I think there's an appetite for this now. So I think that's good news, but there's a lot of competition in this space.
Yeah.
And there's many capabilities that both our industry partners as well as our military personnel are trying to advance into the pipe of funding. And if you're not able to tell the story with the operational implications that those will have on the warfight, you will not be considered for resourcing. And so understanding your program, understanding how it fits into the bigger O plan or the CONOP, understanding what the operational commander will need and how he'll utilize this capability is essential. And I think many people just believe the tech will be good enough to justify this. Huge, huge mistake. I've ended meetings very early with contractors when they've brought in capability and they try to tell me how wonderful the capability is. I need the story.
Yeah.
I need to know how it fits and where it fits and what we want to achieve as a military. I think that's the big mistake that a lot of people make. They don't tell the full story.
We have hit on the word story 2 or 3 times over this interview, and I'll tell you that my experience with storytelling is that so I in my civilian job, I run a company
Mhm.
and I have clients and people's ability to tell a story is one of the most important things that you can learn how to do because it's how you convince somebody to take a decision or side with you on something or anything. And every time you sit down for entertainment, whether you're reading a book or watching a
Mhm.
TV show or watching a movie, like you're listening to a story. You're listening to a story. And Military people will approach me and say, I'm not a good networker. I don't have any sales training. I'm like, you're out of your mind if you don't think that you have network and sales training. Like every time you're sitting around in the chow hall or anything, you're telling stories, like storytelling is just an avenue towards sales, especially if you're in recruiting. Like
Hmm.
you've got to tell a story about why you should join one of the particular branches of the service. And then your networking abilities, we do this all the time in the military. We're like, hey, I need something. I can call a buddy. Can I ask? Do you have a favor? If you help me out with this, I'll help you out with that. Our ability to network and tell stories is probably one of the skill sets that you develop in the military more than anything else, And you hit on three times about telling a story, whether it's telling a story to Congress or telling a story to your boss or telling a story to get a new capability put online. Like, storytelling is a big deal.
It's huge. And as I mentioned earlier, everything I learned about how to perform from a communicator, I learned as an enlisted sailor.
Yeah.
Everything. I refined that when I became an officer, especially post 9/11 and becoming an intelligence briefer where I was briefing, a room full of 4 stars as a lieutenant JG or a lieutenant. But if you just get up there and throw data or facts out, you don't have an audience. You just have people hoping the briefing ends early,
Right.
right? But if you're able to tell a compelling story about why it matters, I started doing a briefing lesson at the Pentagon out of frustration of people not being able to do briefings in a storytelling manner. So I created a presentation where I started training my own staff and others in the Department of the Navy. Word got out about this, and so everyone wanted to come. Leaders were pushing their people towards me. I did this as the deputy under. That's
Okay.
how important I felt it was for
Yeah.
me to stop my day and do this training. And it really came down to how you tell a story. You've got to get into it. You've got to understand how to tell important information without bogging people down. I always talk about don't quote the Bible verses, right? Don't quote the publication numbers. As soon as you start telling people numbers, it's this publication or that, you've lost it. It's irrelevant.
Right.
It's irrelevant. You're telling a story about why this is important. And so don't quote the verses, right? It's rarely needed when you're attempting to convince someone that this is a good idea. I've got a story, Dave, if you want to hear it
Oh, I
about
love stories.
how this came to I it really came full circle for me. I was a senior executive at the time. I was indoctrinating a new 4 star into a set of programs that I was responsible for as an SES. And he was a very smart guy. I still know him today. I was in a conference room waiting on him, and his military assistants kept coming in and saying, he'll be here in a minute. Hey, he's not in a great mood. I'm like, he's not in a great mood. That's great. So he walks in and immediately looks at me and goes, what's this about? Do I need this briefing? And I reached out to him and I shook his hand and I introduced myself. I said, sir, my name is Vic Minella. I'm the senior director of this organization. And if you can just give me 5 minutes, sir, you're going to want to hear this. And he sat down and we started talking. And as I went through the presentation and his role in this, and that was the important part of this, it wasn't just that I was telling him that there are these things that exist. I brought him into the conversation as a responsible partnership. And about 5 minutes in, he looks at his MA and he says, this is important. It's important to me. And Vic can see me anytime he wants.
Nice.
That could have gone a million different ways
Sure.
if I would have just said, well, sir, I can come back another time. If I'd have just said that, he would have been great with that. He would have never known. I would have had to reschedule that and come right back. And then potentially now I'm on the defensive. And so never miss an opportunity to tell a story. And even with someone who doesn't have enough time, they're angry or they're grumpy, if you can convince them that it's important to them, you've won every time.
This was an interesting one from, again, your retirement ceremony, but you joked at some point about reading a last minute intel slide in the Pentagon elevator during the post 9/11 surge. And, of course, I only get what, you wrote in the retirement thing, but you could tell that story. I'd love to actually hear the story rather than just read it. But today, if a team is drowning in information, like, what are the concrete habits you can teach to separate signal from noise and
Mhm.
still coach people instead of just, I don't know, just giving them answers?
Mhm. Oh gosh, noise is everywhere. It really is. It's whether you're in healthcare, and part of the story, I talked about that at the retirement speech. Whether you're in healthcare or whether you're in intelligence or you're a financial manager. There's many things coming at you that are not important.
Hmm.
You have to understand what's important right away. And this was a lesson I learned as a corpsman, as an E1 to E6 as a Navy corpsman was triage. You also need to know as a corpsman that you can't save everyone either. That's part of triage as well. But for everything else you can save, you need to determine what must I do right now to save this one or to advance this bit of information or not. And I think that learning how to triage in an information age is so important. I think sometimes you just need to turn off a couple sources of information as well. You can't have the TV on and be your best
Right.
when you're trying to prepare for an important decision. You can't have your phone sitting next to you in many cases with it buzzing and the noise of life influencing your retention of information. I think you need to focus. I think people don't focus enough. I know that someone who deals with a little ADHD on my own is that I prepped a lot and I liked silence. Even when I was at home, I had 4 children. I would literally go into the bathroom. It was the only place that I knew I could guarantee
Hmm.
silence. I would go in the bathroom and sit on the floor and I would prepare for something that I needed to study for, if it wasn't classified, of course.
You didn't have a skiff
I,
bathroom?
I did not.
Okay.
I
Well,
did not. I had a phone, but
okay.
you don't get the
Yeah.
skiff bathroom. Wow, that would have been too convenient.
Yeah.
It really just comes down to controlling the information. You have to own it. Yes, you've got a boss that's talking to you, and you have to find a way to segregate yourself from so many lines of information coming at you and determine very early on what is important and what must I master for today or for the next 5 minutes. Those conversations about me running to a briefing and getting intelligence reports in an elevator or in a folder, walking out of the office and never having time to read it until I actually get in the room with the CNO, that happened many times.
Wow.
And I would literally wait until they are discussing among themselves to read an intelligence report right in front of them. That's how I was having to do it if I wasn't able to read it in the elevator, as I
Yeah.
pointed out.
Right.
And so you have to utilize the time that you have. You have to master your ability to control the noise, and that is separate yourself from noise that does not matter. When it is game on and you have 10 minutes to prepare, which happened to me even as the undersecretary, everything goes away. You must focus on those areas right now and put everything away. If you've got a staff, you tell them no interruptions, none. If you're at home, talk to your spouse. Find a way to separate just for a little bit to prepare yourself. You could be speaking at church. You could be having a conversation at a community event. You have to have time prepared. You'll never be invited back if you do poorly. Just remember that.
Sure.
It
Right.
is the most important thing you're doing right now. And that is how I've always approached public speaking. That's how I've approached storytelling. And Dave, it started as a Navy corpsman and it went all the way using those same principles as the undersecretary.
I've heard numerous times in my life somebody will say something like, "Oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky." And I think to myself, okay, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as luck, but luck is the residual of being prepared and having some experience.
That's right.
You put those two things together, then you can talk to me about luck. But
Mhm.
luck doesn't happen unless you're properly prepared and you have some experience to put into to the decision making process or something like that. So yeah, I guess luck exists, but that's where the saying I think comes from. You make your own luck.
You really do.
Right.
There's no question.
This is a little unscripted here, but at some point somebody came to you and said, "You are going to be the Undersecretary of the Navy." What was that like? I mean, because like, did you see it coming? Did somebody knock on your door and say, "Hey, you got a second Vic?" Like, I mean, how does that happen?
So this is a very funny story. Now, leading up to that, I had heard that my name had gone forward.
Okay. So somebody advances your name.
Right.
Okay.
But in many ways, that means nothing
Mhm.
because one administration advancing a name could be completely changed by a new administration.
Makes
Right.
sense.
And I knew that.
Yeah.
So I didn't put much say. The day that I found out, Dave, this is an incredible story. So I'm at work as the deputy under, and I start feeling sick, like really sick. And my commute's about 40 miles here in the DC area up to above Fort Meade. And my staff knows that like I don't call out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting to get a fever. I'm getting a little bit dizzy. And I'm like, I have to leave now. And the staff wrapped everything up real quick, grabbed some water, and I got in the car and I drove home in DC traffic. It wasn't a great drive.
I'll bet.
I think this was a Thursday. I get home, I'm backing into my garage, and I am so disoriented. This is terrible safety talk, by the way. I back my car into the garage and I break my mirror on my vehicle. That's how bad I'm feeling.
Okay.
It breaks away, of course, as the mirrors do, but it damaged the mirror. I back it up and I sit there for a few minutes. I think my wife came to the door, like, what's going on? Why are you so? I'm like, I don't feel good. And I think she actually helped me inside. That's how bad I felt. I walk inside, I get some Motrin, I go upstairs and I lay down, and the phone rings. And it's my military assistant, my deputy under military. He says, sir, you're the undersecretary of the Navy.
You're kidding.
That's exactly how it happened.
So somebody came to him and said, "Hey, you mind calling Vic and letting him know the news?"
There was a signed document from the acting secretary of defense approving a list of senior officials in
No
the Pentagon,
kidding.
and my name and title were on them. And I stumbled to the door. I was in bed, Dave. I was hard down. I mean, I was hard down for 2 days after this. And I go to the door and I called for my wife and I said, "Hey, I'm the undersecretary of the Navy.
Wow.
I'm going back to bed."
That's hysterical.
And I did. And I was miserable for the next 2 days. I'm not sure what I had, but it was very, very bad, like flu-like symptoms.
See, that's a great story.
It was horrible. So Monday, I report for duty the following Monday for my first day on the job. That was how it all went down.
Totally new office, new wing. Conceptually, I don't even know where all of that is in the Pentagon.
I was not far from the deputy under office where I was right across the hall from the assistant commandant.
Okay.
And so inside the glass doors in the Pentagon where the secretary, the CNO, and the commandant are is also the undersecretary's office.
Okay.
And so not that far,
Okay.
but an entirely new office. And this is where, the two staffs had to figure
Yeah.
out how to manage
Is there a
this work.
ceremony or something? Or
There-
you just
there-
walk and be like, okay,
No,
let's.
no ceremony,
Yeah.
no ceremony because I was not a political appointee. So there was no new swearing
Oh,
in.
sure. Okay.
There was nothing. I just go to work
Yeah.
and no fanfare whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up here, what didn't I ask you? You've got this terrific career, undersecretary, deputy under. What didn't I ask you?
Dave, I think you didn't ask me some wonderful questions, but I'm not sure if you asked me what it all meant to me.
All right. What did it all mean to you?
Yeah. I think it meant that a young man in a very poor area of Mississippi can walk into a recruiting office and become the undersecretary of the Navy.
Yeah.
And it took me 38 years, but I would turn around and do it all again. And I think for your listeners, anyone who wants a major change in your life, don't be afraid to make that step, because all I did was went into a recruiting office with a very motivated recruiter, and he found a way to get me a great job in the Navy. And again, this is just one example. It could have been the Army. It could have been the Air Force. It could have been non-military, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunity that I was able to take an oath and live it for that entire time and really mean it. I don't always feel that people do. I don't think people understand when they raise their right hand what they're saying. What's coming out of your mouth is real. This is a commitment to teamwork. It's a commitment to your country. It's not a commitment to yourself necessarily. You become a part of this bigger environment, and the lessons that I learned, the friendships that I made, I think it meant everything to me. It meant the world because my world was so small. And what I learned is there is just opportunity everywhere. If you wake up in the morning, you have a smile on your face, you rush into work, you don't complain, and you find a way to contribute no matter what your job is. I don't care what your job is. I never did. I just took every job seriously. and worked as hard as I could to learn the trade that I was in. And I do believe that is the recipe that landed me in the undersecretary role in the second highest position in the Department of the Navy.
That's great. You pay it back, right? With the ROTC unit, you go down to your
I
alma mater all the
I
time.
do. I do. I've spoken to the ROTC units here in Maryland as well. There's a couple, University of Maryland, and
GW.
I've met some of the students there. The University of Maryland, Baltimore County, up in where I live. I've spoken there a few times, but I spent a lot of time down at Ole Miss as part of now my consulting work. I'm working with the university, but I spent a lot of time with the ROTC down there.
That's great. I think I mentioned this to you in our previous episode, but my platoon sergeant from OCS was the assistant Marine officer instructor at Ole Miss so I heard a lot of Ole Miss references and stories from him when he was making me do push-ups. But old Gunnery Sergeant Black, I'll never forget him.
Gunnery Sergeant Black.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's tough to find. Can't search him on LinkedIn.
No.
But
No.
it's just
No.
the name isn't.
No, you can't. But I really did. Wrapping up now, and this was all planned. I mean, my wife and I, Cindy and I, have been talking about retirement for probably now almost 2 years, year and a half or so, and it just the timing of it just worked out really well. And
Yeah.
after 38 years, there really wasn't much further for me to go.
Yeah.
And to be able to fill these roles and be a part of something so amazing was a life's dream come true.
Yeah. Well, you're on LinkedIn.
I am.
Wrap up real quick by just telling us a little bit more about the consulting company, what you're doing. How can people learn more about that?
Yeah. So Minella Global Strategies, I launched in July, 1st of July, and starting to build out the clientele. We mentioned that I was working with the university down at Mississippi, which is the work that I'm doing really focuses on a couple major areas. I am a huge tech person. I actually have a poli-sci degree, political science degree, but I'm a tech geek. I absolutely love bringing technology out of research and engineering and bringing it into the applied world and making it relevant for national security purposes. So that's a big part of what I want to do, whether it be supply chain or novel research and engineering that's being done at a university and bringing that into national security purposes. I love that. I also am very focused on leadership development and organizations that need executive coaching, as well as someone to come in and speak to their broader organization about experiences in leadership or to provide them with guidance or thoughts on leadership is something I'm passionate about. And we'll be working with a couple organizations that I will be affiliating with very soon to support that. That's a huge part of my passion work. And if I can do more of that, then I'm a happy guy.
That's great. I mean, from enlisted to officer to deputy undersecretary to undersecretary, I mean, to use a golf analogy, you'll never make a putt that you leave short. You never left any putts short. So congratulations on a great career.
Thank you, Dave.
And best of luck on the consulting and all that stuff. And I'm really glad we reconnected. And thank you so much for being a part of this project. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you inviting me back. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
See you soon.
All right.